There we go.
Okay.
And the attendees are rolling in now.
Okay, can you let me know when it looks like
Yeah.
the roll has stopped? Hello, Aislinn.
So I think we're kind of plateauing around 36 right now. So
Okay.
this might be a good time to start.
Let's welcome everyone to our November meeting and call today's meeting to order. Let's start with a roll call. My name is Norm Tanina. I'm one of the co-chairs.
Todd Houghton, co-chair.
Cindy Finney, past chair.
Jeff Jackson, treasurer.
Jane Kilburn, secretary.
Dee Heckscher, board member.
Leila Hilton, board member.
Terry Embright, board member.
Herb Cook, board member.
Staff.
David Timmons, interim executive director.
Aislinn Diamante, staff.
David Beckman, capital projects.
Joan Rutkowski, staff.
Great. Thanks, everyone. I am not aware of any changes to the agenda, so we'll open the floor for public comment. Joan, can you facilitate that?
Yes. So if anyone would like to speak, just do the raise hand function next to your name in the participants list. And if you're on the phone, just do *9, and then I'll be able to see that you're interested in making a public comment. And I did not receive any comments in advance, and so far not seeing any hands raised, but we'll give it a few more seconds here.
Okay.
No, I think we could move on.
Okay, great. We have a couple of items as communications of interest. In reading the partner program update, just want to put a plug in for the Friends of Fort Worden. My wife and I, Karen and I, walked the Chinese Gardens Interpretive Trail, and the Friends did a real incredible job on the signage for that. I found it to be very educational. So I recommend folks, if they're looking for a place to walk over the next, over the holiday, make that one of your priorities. We have a consent agenda of 2 sets of minutes, one from our special meeting on the 22nd, and then from our regular board meeting on the 28th. In page 12 of the package, where the minutes are, the actions are summarized, I'd like to call your attention to the 4th action at the top of the page with respect to the KPTZ lease. It was our intent at the last meeting to have the board authorize Todd and I to negotiate and execute the final KPTZ lease agreement. Although the motion only read negotiate. So we'd like to correct that with the board's approval to authorize Todd and me to negotiate and execute the final lease agreement. If you remember, Dave Robison went over the lease terms prior to me going through the economics of the agreement with KPTZ. So the economics will not change. And what we are and I'll talk about the lease further as we get further into the agenda. Any questions about that change?
Nope.
Are there any other edits to the minutes as written?
Nope.
Without any, can I have a motion to approve the special meeting minutes of the 22nd and the amended meeting minutes as I laid out on the 28th? for the 28th?
So moved.
It's moved by Guy,
Second.
seconded by Terry. Any further discussion?
Terry will second.
Thank you, Terry. Without any further discussion, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye.
Okay, the minutes are approved. Todd and I would like to, we worked on a statement that we'd like to share and then open the discussion amongst the board members for anything they'd like to add. So as board members, we serve in our official capacity as volunteer public servants, and we recognize the severity of the problems confronting the PDA right now. We also feel that we owe it to the public and all those impacted by this current situation to do what we can to remedy what has happened and move forward to secure the long-term viability of the fort for the community at large. Todd and I have taken several actions to date that we've shared with you, our fellow board members. Moving forward, we and others need the facts so we can all understand from an independent source how this happened. That process is underway, and we're working hard to partner with the state auditors and do what we can to expedite the audit. The state auditor office will provide the board with an independent, thorough, and transparent report that will be made available to the public. Steps will have to be taken by us and David Timmons to ensure that this never happens again. This is a critical time for the fort, and we ask all concerned to allow the state auditor's office to present their findings. We commit to cooperate fully with any and all actions necessary to secure the future of the fort. Lastly, we'd like to thank David Timmons for his leadership of the PDA through this challenging transition. With those comments said, Todd and I are happy to entertain any board member comments at this time.
Norman, Todd, may I
Sure.
say a
Go
few
ahead, Jeff.
words? Okay,
Yes.
thank you, guys. I want to make, and this is just all things I've thought of over the last 3 or 4 days and come up with talking to a number of citizens. I have really 3 points that I'd like to make, but first with a little background. And really these are points, fellow board members, that are not directed at you. I think you all know me well enough and understand these issues well enough. This is really how I think about the broader community and its citizens and its leaders. A little context, and again, for board members, they know this. I've been an executive in the travel and hospitality industry for over 30 years. I've been in large company leadership positions. And for the last 8 or 9 years, I've also been in a firm that invests in startup companies around the travel and hospitality space. In most of these investments, I sit on boards and thus are really close to the operations. And again, I think people know I don't say this to talk about myself, which I don't really like to do, but to give the audience some context and I hope a sense of grounded objectivity related to the things I want to say about our current situation at the fort. So my first point is, it's sort of echoing what Norman Todd just said. Clearly, in overseeing and managing a complex situation like our operation is, mistakes have been made. I would, and I don't think any of us who are colleagues on the board would try to avoid that mistakes have been made. But really what I think is critical for this community to understand is the enormity of the situation that we face right now is completely about the impacts COVID has had on the operations. That is not an excuse. That is a grounded set of reality for anyone in this space. It has impacted our financials dramatically. It's impacted our people. We have many fewer of them. The turnover has been extraordinary, and our ability to frankly survive. This is no different than almost all travel businesses, and especially especially the ones with diverse hospitality and sort of gathering businesses where groups and meetings and the like are the core of the business. And again, I believe, and I think it is strongly backed up by the facts, that absent COVID, all of the issues that we're confronting and Norm referred to will be talked about through these audit procedures. All of them were solvable as normal business problems were it not for COVID. So that's my first point. And again, on the community, I think it's really, really important to understand this is a board who many of its members are not doing any of this for compensation or recognition or glory or any of those sorts of power, any of those sorts of traditional feedback mechanisms. And also, it has been a full-time job for many of these people since February. And by full-time, and I'm not exaggerating, that's 4 or 5 hours every day. That's weekends. Finally, on the people point, these are talented, ethical people, and this community. And if my voice is cracking a little, it's because I feel this strongly. This community should be grateful for the people who are putting in this effort and the talents that they're providing, regardless of the outcome and regardless of how you feel. We should all be grateful. And frankly, I have an ask. Nobody working on this project wants recognition or praise or anything like that. We're really, really all just doing it for the potential for the fort, its mission, helping it be sustainable, which all accrues to the benefit of Port Townsend and the community. But what we do need is we need an understanding of the complexity and the difficulty of this situation before we can move forward. And most importantly, we need support. Anything we do without the support of this community and the various different constituencies that we serve, it just won't succeed. And frankly, anything we propose, any solution that comes together will have to be collaborative, and it will not be perfect. It will not fit any one constituent perfectly. But without this support, this board or any board who is responsible for this operation in the future will fail. And that's completely unnecessary and can easily be avoided. So thanks for listening.
Thanks, Jeff. Any other thoughts that any board member would like to share? Todd, any closing thoughts you might have?
On the eve of Thanksgiving, I think we owe a lot of people thanks. First and foremost, all of you are board members, and second and foremost, all the staff who have really remained extraordinarily loyal. And even those that have left the PDA, excuse me, are still loyal. Many did not want to leave. Even though they made a choice to leave, they did not want to leave. So we owe that to them. And we really want to thank David Timmons for stepping in an extraordinarily difficult time. So on the eve of Thanksgiving, and thanks to everybody who has supported the PDA and who loves the fort. And we have, I don't know how many people on right now, 65 people on. And I think to a one, those individuals care about this fort. And we are all the stewards of the fort. We, as a PDA board, have a particular piece of that stewardship, but that stewardship is much larger than our roles as PDA board members. And I would like to echo Jeff's entreaty that we work together to solve this enormous problem, and enormously complex problem. It really, that old trite saying, it takes a village. in this case, it does take a village to address this. And every one of the organizations that are represented in the audience today and the participants have their own issues as well. And we recognize that. And we, as best we can, want to support your endeavors as well. And particularly those of you who are part and parcel of the fort, part of that community, that village of the fort. But in this case, the village it's much bigger. This village is Port Townsend, it's the county, and it's the state. The state parks is part of our village, and people like Peter Herzog are part of our village. So again, on the eve of Thanksgiving, we give thanks.
Thanks, Todd. Okay, with no further comments, we'll move on. Thank you. We have a partner update next, the Fort Worden Collaborative. Todd, do you want to introduce this topic because you're with the collaborative?
Yeah, I would. Well, I want to thank Janine and Mitch for, as volunteers, and Dave Robeson is working with them. But as volunteers, Janine and Mitch thankfully have stepped up into a leadership role as part of the steering committee for the long-term group within the collaborative. And then Janine, bless you, Janine, has taken on the facilitator coordinating role for the entire collaborative. And, it's been a bit of a slog since February, but we keep putting one foot in front of the other and making progress. And I think what we've seen is a coming together, probably unlike any of us have seen. And I'm 2 years into it, but I'm still more of a newcomer than a lot of people. And I'm seeing much more unity of endeavor than I think we may have seen. And everyone is working for the purpose of keeping this place we call Fort Worden alive. So Janine, thank you.
Thank you. And thanks for this opportunity to talk to you about the collaborative and provide an update. And Todd, you're very generous. It really is working because everybody is leaning in and in a positive spirit. And I think that is indicative of how we began. It really started as out of a desire to build a unified, sustainable approach to planning for all the Fort constituents. And while we only met in person one time in January, thanks to the leadership of Renee Klein and pivoting the forum for the collaborative to online meetings, the founding principle of stronger together is borne out. So I think I'm honored to work among the people that are in this group. Currently, the collaborative is organized into 3 working groups. One is diversity, equity, inclusion. That's led by Shelley Levins and Kate Ingram. And they keep us really connected to the powerful work of the larger community that ensures that the principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion are going to be woven and integrated into our planning forward. The second group is the midterm group, and that is led by Zan Manning, Leah Mitchell, and Steve Reed. And that really focuses on the implementation of how we can work better together today, how we can share the successes and celebrate the progress, including the Guard Shack, bravo, the Guard Shack Information Center, and also what Norm, you mentioned, the just exquisite planning and tenacity of Zan on the Chinese gardens. Both were led by the Friends of Fort Worden. The third group is really the long look, and it's a long-term working group, which is focused on exploring, vetting, and then reporting on concepts and models for the future sustainable path that really addresses the interdependence of the PDA, state parks, the city of Port Townsend, partners, and the community as a whole. And I think about this group really as the boots on the ground that can provide the eventual professional consultant with the realistic, comprehensive perspective and that groundwork upon which planning can proceed. The next step in the long-term group is to compare and contrast elements of other places that have similarities to our vision for Fort Worden, and to present that in a cohesive, comprehensive manner so that we really can take the pieces that fit our situation best from other places around the country, around the world, and craft our own unique brand that will take us into the future. So with that, I stand for questions.
Todd and Janine and indirectly Norm, I just had a comment. It's been several months since Todd talked to me about one of I think really important work streams for the collaborative, and I'm not even sure if it fits in here, but I've been wanting to. I think it's important that the broader community, the collaborative community, understand this work is underway. And that is that Norm and I are overseeing, we hired a woman who worked for the Fort 2 or 3 years ago that I think many of you know. I won't mention her name, but and she is building an actually quite in-depth Excel spreadsheet based on how the current pre-COVID 2019, if you want to call it that, model at the Fort works. So, and I'll describe it structurally, and it will be built in a fashion that will have enough flexibility to, increase. It's how the current model works, meaning, we provide service and products to the community, to people coming from out of town, et cetera, at sort of market rates for independent travelers and groups, and setting aside the maintenance hurdle that we all know about. Those cash flows, we'll call them that, serve to create a financial pot of money that can support, one hopes, sort of the ability to keep not-for-profits in a better operating shape, to sort of below market rates for our mission. That, I think, is at least my vision. Now, how far below market is affordable and sustainable? That is what this model is intended to solve, right? So it says, as long as we're able to, if you want to think back to pre-COVID, we were generating $7 million of revenue, 6 to 7, all of which kind of went back into the ecosystem of the Fort. Anyway, we're going to build that model, and I think that will be essential to you, Janine, and Todd, and others on the team, to both tweak it and see how much up and down and how much it really is generated with those sorts of revenues from outsiders, if you will, not partners. And then and use it for other capabilities too. Like, are there other models that might work? But anyway, I think Todd offered that we would do that, and that work is underway. I think it's been underway for a couple of weeks now.
Great, thank you.
Other comments? I think it's great to see the progress. Todd and I talk almost every day right now, but we always debrief on a weekly basis what's going on at the collaborative, and the quality of the discussions that he shares are very impressive. I also want to thank Jane and Leela, in addition to Todd, for their participation in I think that's everyone, right? From the PDA that participates. I'd just like to thank them for their participation and dedication to working in this important group. So thank you, Janine, and thank you to Renee, your predecessor. And I know Mitch also has a role in leadership, so I'd like to acknowledge him too.
Yes.
I would like to say, Norm, that we'll be looking at this RFP next or soon. And that's going to be very creative work. And I think people in the community ought to be looking forward to that. With the presentation you'll see David Timmons make about an idea that he's getting to develop that will fit into this this study project. I think it's going to be a very creative next few months once we get a consulting firm in here to work with the collaborative. So I just something to look forward to, I want to say.
By the way, Todd and Janine and others who worked on it, that was a pretty impressive RFP. again, back to points earlier about how people are pitching in here. That was a, highly professional RFP, from my point of view.
But Dave was the drafter and many people responded to it.
Yeah, Dave Robinson wrote that, and then I believe there were some real quality edits coming out of the collaborative team, the leadership team. So, and to the point that Jeff made around the modeling work that we're overseeing right now, that'll be, and I think that could be an important input into the planning process that the RFP lays out. So I do think all of this fits together like a puzzle right now. So I look forward to seeing the final mosaic. So thank you, Janine.
Thank you.
We're moving over to now, David Timmons is going to talk about a recovery plan update. He's going to share a concept that he's built and has been socializing. I find it to be pretty innovative, and I really look forward to board discussion on it at the end. David? You're muted still, David.
I wasn't muted, I was just mumbling. So one of the things that I've been doing is, taking an awful lot of information and trying to put it into a context, and also in terms of a concept of how we move forward, and trying to address what I see were some of the issues that may have contributed to sort of not just the collapse of the PDA in the context in face of an event like this. And I always remember in college, this one professor always would drill into our heads, that a complex problem requires an equally complex solution. And if you attempt to oversimplify, and if you attempt to not address the complexities with your solution, you're bound not to address the issues, and you're going to leave yourself vulnerable. And I think that is what I see happening here. And what I've tried to do is to look at how we can have a path forward given all the situations that we got. And so I want to kind of walk you through this. And the idea being that this is just one concept. This is just an idea to stimulate some discussion, to get things moving, forward. It's also a structural proposal. It isn't necessarily dealing with a lot of the finer tuning issues. It's really looking at the actual structure and the exposures that we have in terms of the structure of the organization, the facilities, and the relationship with the partners and the community. So, with everything, there are challenges, but challenges can always create opportunities for us. So the challenges we had was the COVID-19 impacts, the shutdown, the reopening plan, the undisclosed financial situation, restricted operations under COVID, and limit what we can do. But yet we still have regular maintenance expenses and ongoing to keep the property in shape. There's also unexpected deferred maintenance issues that come up constantly within the context of the property that I'm learning about. But there's possibilities that are brought by change. We can bring in new leadership, new service delivery models, new partnerships, renewed partnerships, and we can restore the financial future. There's all paths forward in all of those. So some of the challenges that we're going to be facing, the loans outstanding, and we've talked about, Maker Square, project completion's underway, but we've got to solve the problem. One of the things that we'll report out later is that I think that we have this pretty much figured out what needs to be done to get to a successful closure of that. Glamping, it's another one, but it's a challenge that we're going to have to face. But the plan is, in talking with the bank, is we're going to treat this more like a business opportunity to renegotiate the terms of the loan so that we can get that project completed. Same with energy efficiency in terms of looking at how do we restore what was diverted from that so that we can get those elements finished out and completed. So all of those are the challenges that we're going to face, going ahead. As I mentioned, we're looking to renegotiate new terms. We're going to restore the diverted funds. We're going to ensure the capital completion, and we can advance other forward needs opportunities along while we do that. Some more, on a reopening plan, it was really unsustainable. Had we known what was more information, we probably would have taken a different track and a different path forward. But also it was impacted by, the public perceptions and then the environmental factors such as the wood fire smoke that caused a number of cancellations and changes in that plan. Right now, though, we're looking at a $250,000 operating deficit that's growing that we're trying to address. So we're looking at that challenge. So the reopening plan is we should be ready to launch a full reopening by July 1st. The advent of and rollout of now the COVID vaccines, that looks promising. Also, we will have officers' row work completed that we can put back online. For successful with glamping, we can get that back online. So we'd be fully operational by July 1st if all goes well. But what we got to do is look to find support to keep and maintain minimum operations until that time period. So we're going to have to raise $1.5 million in startup funds to reach that July 21 goal. One of the things that we're going to look into is the possibility of $1 million startup loan to try to pre-fund some of this. And we've already obtained a $200,000 donation to help facilitate this from a very generous donor. So the concept is, based on a belief that the fort needs to empower the partnership management model is what I'm calling it. That encompasses a variety of activities and needs the fort campus. A number of years ago, I went to a training program at the World Wildlife Federation to better understand environmental mediation and negotiation. And we started out with a whole series of exercises. And the first exercise was a game called Win All You Can. And you're given 10 cards from 1 to 10. And there's 4 players. And the instructions are very simple. Win all you can. So you're trying to out-trump your other card players by winning all you can. Well, there's a secret there. Mathematically, it's impossible to win all you can if you play as an individual. The only way you can win all you can is all 4 of you play together to win all you can. So the lesson that I took from that is this is a partnership. That partnership has to win all they can. And the way to do that is to play your cards together, not individually, not try to win on your side or the other side, but everybody pulls together on this. So the concept is, well, it will appear complex. It's designed in that context because it's trying to meet the complexity of the organization and the challenges that it faces. And it also takes a look at, you got 1 foot solidly on the ground in the government side. The PDA is an extension of the city. And the state parks is an extension of the state. And that's solidly a government activity and a governmental function. On the other side, though, your other foot is in sort of this enterprise activity and enterprise functions. And those two don't necessarily always meet each other very effectively. And so you really have to look at making some structural changes, how you go about bridging, that black line that's between you in terms of the one side you're a government, on the other side you're an enterprise. And hospitality is an excellent example of that, where that is actually a true business enterprise activity. And it's kind of unusual to have a government running a hospitality service. Generally, it's some other partnership arrangement that's made in the context of doing it. Vancouver, Washington is a good example of that. The Hilton Hotel that is in downtown Vancouver, Washington, is actually a building that's owned by the city, but it's operated by the Hilton Company. The city didn't even attempt to try to operate it because you literally would run into a host of problems with compliance with public records, compliance with gifting of funds, and lending of credit. So those challenges really have to be looked at carefully. The other is we have to look at it in the context of a legal framework that builds resiliency through a series of mechanisms that we can deploy that will actually help protect and diversify the fort into the future, and all the assets and the diversity of the issues that it operates and tries to meet. So the context that I've presented in my idea is, on one hand, we've got the governance side. And then on the other hand, we've got campus management. And what I'm really looking at is the campus management goes more now towards a partnership model to manage the assets, and the programming is under the partners with the asset management under separate activities and companies. Now, while this may look complex on a legal framework, it is, but operationally, we can make this very seamless. So what we're looking at then is the partnership management. This is the array of partners that are currently at the fort. But we also think in terms of the context that we may have opportunities for others and new partners. And if we build this correctly, we can actually enhance the existing partnerships, but we can also expand to provide more. And that diversity is going to give you resiliency in your business model. And so that's one of the things that we want to strengthen, is how do we strengthen each one of these partners, but also can we bring in other partners to help diversify and strengthen this even better. So the reorganization, and what I'm talking about for the PDA, we've spent a lot of effort and energy in putting together a very solid plan with state parks and a relationship with state parks. What I see in a context is that we reorganize the PDA to be acting more, and I'm just using this phrase because I didn't have any other way to describe it, but it's kind of like a holding company. It's going to hold the public trust. It's going to hold the lease with the state parks. It'll act as the interface with state parks and take the lead in that respect of passing through what we can gather through state and federal assistance, and also through efforts with state parks to build and address a lot of the capital infrastructure within the fort. And what this means is, from a organizational framework, the PDA as it existed before will be reorganized and restructured down to a small administrative unit. And it'd be primarily one that would work to address and try to bring in the capital resources needed, but also to address the long-term lease needs and issues that will make the fort flourish. The city gets a role in this in the context that it's the charter holder. So what we would need to do is go back to the city and work with the city in regards to restructuring the charter as necessary to reflect this new concept going forward. This would also incorporate, reorganization and a new role for the board as well as for the organization itself. And so I think that it's a way to step forward in a very positive way towards a reconstruction. The Fort Worden Foundation really becomes more of a philanthropic arm, and I think that what it will continue to do well in that role, it'll do it through the governance section or efforts, through the PDA as a pass-through, which can go direct to the partners, or it can be a pass-through. Partners can do their own philanthropic fundraising as well. So it's not limiting that, it's just defining the role better for Fort Worden Foundation. We would look at the reorganization of that because we got to have a bright line between the PDA and Fort Worden in terms of, you know, how it's structured. I think that the foundation needs to be more independent of the PDA and operate more independently of the PDA. So then what I'm recommending is that, and we did this in the Housing Trust back in Burlington, Vermont, was when sometimes what you need to do, if you need a partner, if a partner doesn't exist, you create a partner. One of the things that we did is we created through the Housing Trust a series of partnerships by creating separate new entities where we took a variety of different players and brought them all together under a new entity so that we could actually take advantage of the different structures and different programs and the different funding sources to maximize our use. And this is really looking, when I'm talking about this here at the fort, is really looking at our assets, our physical asset, the physical plan of the property. By inventorying out all the buildings that would be assigned and structured under education, we could create a new entity that would be a partner that would have those assets within it. And part of the reason for this is to diversify the organization so that if there's one element that is struggling, it doesn't impact necessarily the other elements. So education would be looking like at Building 202 is a good example of where we could take that and incorporate that into this model. That would also allow us to take advantages of funding that would be eligible for that organization that would not otherwise be eligible through the PDA or other resources. A good example of this would be, you know, funds that go for education purposes. That's how we did it with Building 202. They came from the higher education program. So by building a partnership around education and those physical assets at the fort, we could then build, you know, a better resiliency in that category. We could also, I believe, address the long-term capital investment that needs to be made in those properties. Hospitality, I look at in a different light. I think that hospitality really should become a separate LLC. It could still be nonprofit. It doesn't have to be a charitable nonprofit. It could be a non-charitable nonprofit, or it could be a profit. We need to analyze the financial modeling of the hospitality sector because that was the big driver here for a lot of the income. And that's where a lot of the lost income went due to COVID. But had it been set up as a separate LLC, it would have been eligible for state and federal assistance that the PDA was not. There's also risk management factors here as well in terms of running a hospitality sector operation in the context of a government business that exposes the government to a risk that I think that we probably should need to address. And by creating a separate LLC to operate under the hospitality services, this would be the commons, it would be the rental venues, it would be the food service, you know, all the hospitality units. It becomes where it could be structured in a way too that everybody would benefit from the profits or share in the profits of it. After you set up your business model, once you meet your goals, you could have a profit sharing for the whole partnership to kind of help come in and bring that together. And I think that there's a lot of reasons to do it this way, particularly I would say from a risk management approach, but also from challenges that hospitality services has to conform to the lending and credit prohibition as well as the gifting of fund prohibition. So it will allow us to look at some things. The other idea that I had was this could be an excellent opportunity to do work with the education side to bring a new partner in, which could be a culinary food service, hospitality service, education program. And we could also with it as a separate LLC, it would make it eligible for CURB funding, which is the Community Economic Revitalization Board, that state guaranteed loans and grants are provided, through that program. So this would open up another avenue and another door for us to look at this. Arts is a similar, where I think that in the context that we would take all the different venues, try to put them together so that we could actually begin to look at avenues of funding and support to those venues and facilities. There is a program in the state that is eligible for nonprofits for capital grants. They're earmarks. They generally put several millions of dollars a year into those. But to be eligible, the nonprofit has to have an ownership interest in the asset. So by doing this, we could actually create an avenue of where ownership interest in the physical plants could be assigned and allocated through the arts so that they could proceed to seek funding through the capital programs that are available only to the nonprofits through the legislature. And then on the other is on the challenge would be facilities. There's still, a lot of facilities and grounds maintenance that we have to address. There's also deferred maintenance and capital needs that are going to have to be done. But what we could do is create a facilities division that would actually channel that effort and manage that effort going forward. This is going to be a real challenge for us, going forward. Excuse me. Sorry, propane truck showed up, dog went crazy.
We need to block that attendee next time.
Yeah. So on the facility side, we would basically be looking at the deferred maintenance and the capital as a way to manage those and coordinate all that activity. And so this would be sort of part of the partnership in terms of anyone doing it on their own. We would have a cooperative effort to do it in a way that it would work out for everyone's best interest. But then on the asset side, then going into the programming and coordination, as I mentioned, a lot of this is going to look complex, but I think we can make this seamless. I think this is where technology can be our ally, where we can create a management system that would make this all look seamless. But also it would be, in terms of the programming and coordination, would be part of a new operating group that would actually be comprised of the partners that would actually program all of these assets collectively and together and working as one group and one team. And I think that's kind of the approach I'd like to see us take, is where on the left-hand side, we've got the governance model. On the right-hand side, we've got the campus management, which is really just managed by those who are going to benefit the most from it. It'll also build some resiliency in terms of if one area is struggling, the other areas can go. It'll also diversify income streams. It'll diversify a number of things. It'll also help manage risk and risk exposure that we all face just in everyday life in terms of what we do. So this is kind of the concept that I came up with. Like I say, it's there to stimulate discussion and dialogue. Hopefully we can blend this into the collaborative and its studies to see if there's a desire to move forward, then how can we make this work? How can we structure this to look seamless to the eye, but while underneath, we have created a stronger, more resilient model of managing all these assets and activities at the fort and allow them to thrive. So glad to take any questions.
Board
David,
questions?
I have just one comment, which is, in spite of all this apparent complexity, and there is some, I would offer, and Terry knows this well, maybe others as well, is that the model of a real estate owner and being separate from an operating entity of a hotel or a resort is extremely commonplace. So for example, a Marriott or a Hyatt or an IHG mostly does not own the underlying real estate and is mostly not responsible for that component, like the maintenance and things. So what the operating company or the management company brings is the operations, some of the absorbs some of the risks that David talked about. So at least sort of generically and structurally, that model has tons of precedent. That portion of this model has tons of precedent.
David, this is Cindy. Are we going to, at a later date, have some time to dig a little deeper into this? I mean, I like your models, but you know, I'm just thinking of the facilities. That's a big elephant in the room, and that was one of the hard issues that we were trying to address this year. I mean, the nut is for last year was going to be around 600,000, and we don't know what we don't know with these buildings because of the age, and that will have a big impact on how the rest of these areas operate. Because that's the reality of what we face. We have to figure out, how do we take care of that? How do we take care of this wonderful asset that we have and preserve it? And so it would be good if we had some opportunity just to, all of us, maybe at a future meeting, to brainstorm a little bit more about what you want to do, what you're thinking, and get some of dig deeper into our concerns.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was hoping to do. It was challenge that. And the facilities will be the elephant in the room. It's got the biggest price tag of anything in terms of, you know, you previously have done a complete inventory, you know, of all the deferred maintenance, and totals up to about $100 million worth of investment. And I know, like, the chiller alone in the Commons, you know, is getting to the point of its useful life, and that's a $2 million ticket.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I'm looking at it in terms of, how do we diversify those costs so that it doesn't fall on just one individual or one organization. You know, how do we share in that going forward? But also in terms of, we have to have some broad discussions with state and the legislature in terms of how are we going to get help, because you can't dump that $2 million on the partners. It's not going to work. So, you know, how do we share that? How do we get through that? And that's kind of the idea. But this was just to start stimulating the discussion on how do we move forward. We got to have a different model. The old model showed its vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
One single event caused it to collapse, you know, because it was so tied to the hospitality.
Mm-hmm. David, we have a lot of partners on the call today. In terms of the model that you have around the asset management stack, in terms of their leases, who would be their future leaseholder under this model?
It would be diversified. Ultimately, it comes back to the PDA, but it would be, you know, assigned out to the education category, the hospitality category, the arts.
Okay.
Facilities would not really be it would be more of an asset manager than anything. It would just be a conduit for, you know, coordinating capital investment, coordinating, you know, deferred maintenance, and providing that kind of support.
David, do you see the coordinating council as a mechanism to ensure equitability among these entities in leases? For example, if you have one lease, one arts, for example, or education, offering leases at a drastically different rate than one of the others, then we create an inequitable situation within the structure itself. How do we address that?
Well, I think that would be through the, you know, you'd have to develop terms and conditions for all of these. And you'd have to look at that. One of the ideas too is that we might be able to look at something other than a lease. We might be able to look at it like a franchise or a license agreement. So instead of leasing a building, you have a franchise or a license to use that building. You know, in terms of, instead of a lease. And so then instead of you know, on a square foot basis, it's on a fee basis. So we can look at different ways to achieve the same outcomes, just using different mechanisms to do those and putting those on the table for discussion so that you could avoid that, you know, making sure that you have equity amongst all players.
David, thank you very much for your thinking on this. This is really, really creative. I'm having a hard time getting my head around campus management and all that, and how separate entities would be directed by the green circle of the coordinating council. But I sure look forward to continued discussions about this, and I think the collaborative can certainly take and run with this, and our consultant that we hopefully are able to hire can maybe take a hard look at this and really flesh it out with you.
Yeah, the concept on that, it needs to be thought through more, but it was like we had a clear way for the city, you know, to create a PDA. I mean, it was a very clear model in terms of how to create it. I think what I'm looking at is, can we take the collaborative and partnerships to create, for lack of, just as an example, their own PDA structure to manage all of these assets so that they're more empowered and more responsible for the day-to-day activities and management and allocation programming and things like that. And the PDA is really looking at more the governance model and the governance side of things. It's just, it's an idea.
Yeah.
So David, this is Cindy again. So I'm thinking of a timeline. How do we move forward? Time's not our friend. We open back up in July. Our facilities and deferred maintenance and all of that, you know, the clock starts ticking on it. And
yeah, and one of the issues that came up during the reopening was because things had been shut down and restarted, then things broke.
mm-hmm.
A lot of things broke. Probably first out of the box, I would say or argue would be your hospitality services, because that's going to generate your biggest income source,
right?
To help, you know, restore what we need. I think that can be done, I think, pretty quickly in terms of how we could go about doing it. So as a PDA, you can set up and create an LLC that would operate the hospitality services.
Mm-hmm.
That could be transferred and signed, so we could get some of this moving pretty quickly.
Okay.
One of the benefits, David, of, as you know, because you wrote the charter for the PDA, one of the benefits and the visions I think the state parks had and also the city had was local control of Fort Worden. And in many ways, this seems to even more deeply embed that concept of local control in the asset management stack, which I think is a real benefit to what it is you're advocating for.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to stress. Embed it more deeply, you know, particularly even within the community, but within the fort itself.
Right. I think it's one of the real benefits of what you're advocating for here.
Yeah. Well, what I'm really advocating is empowering the partners to step up and give them a venue of where they can have more say in the day-to-day and the future of the fort.
Mm-hmm.
And this is separate from, I wasn't at the PDA when it started, when there were concessionaires running various parts of the organizations, and that simply didn't work.
No.
And with, you know, I think there was someone separate doing food and someone separate doing housekeeping and so on. So this is different from that, correct?
Yeah, part of the problem with privatizing services, particularly up here, is you don't have a lot of depth in opportunities, you know, for businesses. You know, you don't have a diversity of you know, of a labor force. So it was one of where I think that it's, if you were to treat it like a concessionaire, you could do an RFP, or you can create your own concession. And that's the idea. The legal structure is such that it allows you to do things more entrepreneurial than if you were just stuck in a governmental sector. You know, I mean, like many hospitalities, you know, service programs, they can offer discounts, you know, rebates, other things, packages. I don't know how you can do that and get around the government prohibitions of the lending of credit or the gifting of funds in a structure like that. Because you have to show consideration for, you know, any discount, rebate, or whatever. So you've got to, you know, and then there's also a risk exposure too that is more legal and technical. But, you know, I spent many years on the executive board of the Washington Cities Insurance Authority, and you hear about all the different litigations and the claims and the complexity of that and how you build around structures to protect your liability exposure. You can't do that as a government as much as what we could do is by creating it as a separate LLC. You can transfer liability onto that for that sector and not assume it as the host organization, you know, unless you show negligence. But there's a lot of things that, as Cindy mentioned, to deep dive into in terms of some of the reasons behind this.
David, again, my bias coming from higher education, in a way, this approximates what a university might look like. If you think of the PDA as the board of trustees, you know, at private institutions, board of trustees comes to campus 3 or 4 times a year, you know, broad oversight, strategic planning. You know, they hold the legal stewardship of the university. And then the coordinating council is the various governance mechanisms at a university. And then the asset management belongs to the schools of the university. Facilities actually on many campuses, my own included, was actually outsourced. So we had you know, you could either create your own and operate it, or you can outsource it. You know, we happen to outsource that. We outsource food services because universities aren't experts at operating food concessions, frankly. So I think as the collaborative looks at this, and we look at other models throughout the nation, none of which are going to approximate us. I don't think we're very few. We may also want to look at university structures and how they compare to this as well.
Mhm.
Yeah. Todd, totally concur with looking at that structure. One of the questions I think there's a couple elephants in this room, one being the maintenance and facilities costs that Cindy raised that has to be dealt with, in the logical, sort of place to deal with that is with the state, because they ultimately own the residual value. And maybe normally have the deepest pockets. The other elephant that is manageable but has to be addressed and cannot go unaddressed is, how do we, whoever we is, how does that entity, call it, and I don't even know which one it is here, but my view is that there's a very functional, workable model that combines sort of market rate revenue and not diverts it, but utilizes this, I talked about earlier, utilizes the cash flows from a market rate revenue source to sustain a not-for-profit, mission-driven set of partners. I believe that can be governed by one entity, and should be, because ultimately, if you have a great diversity of, much like a university, of partners and activities and needs for different services, someone just, some partners are happy with the, what's the word I'm looking for, with the lowest cost sort of hospitality service. Others want reasonable prices and reasonable food, et cetera. All those things have to come together to create a sustainable model. I believe it can be done. I think, in fact, absent the maintenance cost, it was being done. We had to make changes for sure, but I think that model can work. I think the other elephant is, if everybody who's a constituent of this model has a hand in governance, that becomes pretty unwieldy, I would think. In any case, that has to be addressed. So, Todd, I know that I know sometimes.
Welcome to my world, Jeff.
Right, educational organ. I was on the board of Carleton for a year. It's really hard to manage, and which is why we're so fortunate to have you on our board. But anyway, I just think that having everybody having their hand in governing that kind of thing sounds great, may well be great, but the sort of natural inherent tensions has to be addressed up front, or we'll sort of find ourselves back in the soup again. That's all.
Yeah, that was one of my hopes too, would be is in the context of the RFP, it's great in terms of process and planning, but where everything always seems to fall flat is in implementation. I remember when I was hired at the city, first thing I was told was to get the city out of Waterman Katz building and find another solution. So I started researching, and I found the original 1968 comp plan. In there was a goal and a policy that the city should restore City Hall and expand in an addition on the back. Then I found a study that was done in the 70s, another one in the 80s, and then another one in the 90s. And each one came back with the same analysis, the same process, the same, citizen task force, and same recommendation: restore City Hall and put an addition on the back. So when I came to the council, I remember there was a big uproar about, well, wait a minute, that's not how we do things in Port Townsend. We have to have a citizen oversight committee. We have to have a task force. We have to have to study this. We have to look at this. And I said, well, you did it in the 60s, you did it in the 70s, you did it in the 80s, you did it in the 90s. But you never planned, you planned, but you never implemented. Well, in the context of it, you know, what we really need to focus on is we've got the vision, we got the plan. You know, I don't think there needs to be a whole lot of changes to that. I think what needs to be addressed is how are we going to make it work? How do we deal with those tensions that Jeff talked about? How do we deal with all these assets and how are we going to address that? And I think that's what we really need to really focus hard on. And then how do we build this so it is a more resilient model so that it's not so vulnerable to these kind of issues when they do come up. And I think that's what I think we need to really focus hard on how to make it work. And how can we make this happen? But that's my goal, you know, that in terms of what I would recommend, that, like I say, you know, we can win all we can, but we got to play our cards together.
Yeah, and David, the model that I referred to earlier, I see that as a commonly held. I see that as a planning tool that everyone will have access to, and everyone will be, it will make all the potential cash flows, need for cash flows available so that it's broadly understood, which I think is the most important implementation tool, right? Is commonly held awareness about what can be generated under certain structures and what needs to be subsidized. And from there, I think ideally that elephant in the room starts to become smaller and smaller. And so this is not, again, Todd is more understands how the collaborative is working, is meant to work. And there are, you know, transition elements here, but at least in my mind, I expect to create this and in a way that all can use it.
Any further questions for David at this point?
I just wanted to make a point along a similar line. In higher education in this community for the last 20 or 30 years, we've had similar processes as dealing with town hall. We've had people come together, we've had community inventories, we've had focus groups. Time we come back with the same ideas, the same assets, the same needs, and the same challenges. And every time it goes nowhere because we're always looking for one agency to come in and solve the problem. We wanted Western to come in and establish a campus. WSU had a learning center and that was vulnerable to the recession, but it still didn't feed several birds with that berry. And I think this is an opportunity for us to think about that too, because I think the challenge for these educational partners in this community is not looking at the viability of partnerships as leaders in the community for higher ed and always focusing on bringing in one institution. So anyway, I just hear what you're saying, David, about that process, because we've done that with higher education ever since I've lived here. And every study comes up with exactly the same ideas, assets, challenges, but there's no one person who will fix it for you. So I like your model because I think it addresses that.
Well, David, I know you dubbed that as a concept presentation, but it's obvious that over the last week, there's some depth that you've really been able to build to the thinking. So thank you for showing us a potential path forward. And we look forward to continuing to move this ahead quickly. And do you want to move into the next agenda topic and talk about the RFP, David? Because this is clearly one place where we can actually put some further meat on the bones of what it is that you presented just now.
David, you went unmuted, so yeah, there you go.
I was worried about the dog attacking or something. The RFP is ready to be issued and go. What we're looking for is a funding source for it. We applied to the PIF board at the county to repurpose an existing grant, but we kind of ran into a roadblock there in the context that the county had established a more restrictive use of the funds than what the state would allow. So what we decided what we have to do is to get the funds through that PIF, we'd have to have the grant reassigned to the local EDC office and then enter into an agreement with them to forward the funds to us to do the management study. And so we're in the process now of reaching out to the EDC. The director was at the meeting. He seemed to indicate that there's a willingness to do that. So we're going to talk to them and work out and then go back in and reapply to the PIF board to recommend to the county commissioners to release the funds. In the meantime, though, if we can find other funds available, then we're going to pursue that as well. So we're going to have more of a two-track process here to secure those.
So then no action today. Action would be premature.
Yeah, there's no action yet until we actually have a contract. But I don't want to release the RFP until we actually have a funding source for it.
Right. Okay.
It takes a lot of work to respond to those. And I don't want to have people doing that if we're not going to have the funding.
Move on to the financial report.
Norm, just a question though.
Oh, sure.
The action was just to approve the RFP substantially in the same form as presented. We weren't asking the board at this point in time to issue the RFP, but to approve it. Do you think we should go ahead and approve it as is and that it's ready to go?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, that would be helpful.
Okay. Good catch, Todd. Can I have a motion to approve the RFP as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Jane, seconded by Cindy. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? The RFP is approved.
Norm, I've got a quick question. What's the cost of this going to be approximately?
We were planning on it being the 150K from the PIF grant. So.
Okay.
Yeah, and that has to be matched by 20%.
Okay.
That can include in-kind contributions. So.
Okay. Good. Financial report.
All of the collaborative people working on this will be a huge in-kind contribution.
It's true.
Yeah. Well, but we would need to document all the time. So. On the financial report, I wish I had something to present, but one of the things that we're working on, we've got two things underway in terms of three things actually. One is the reconciliation and restating the financials from 2015 to 2019. That's currently underway, and we're making a lot of progress on that, but there's a lot of documentation that had to be prepared and researched and submitted. Also, much of that documentation wasn't stored electronically, so it had to be scanned. So it's been a real challenge to get that, but it is probably we are going to have some preliminary report in December is what I'm anticipating. What that's doing is taking from 2015 and restating the financial report from what was submitted to a cash basis format. And that's for each year from 2015 forward. And so that's being done by an independent CPA. We will not have those, the auditor's office will not go back and re-audit at that point because they've already done what they said was their audit. but these will be restated financial numbers certified by a CPA, but they will be unaudited.
David, that's essentially going back to cash basis from accrual, is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
'Cause I understand the PDA made a decision back in, I don't know, you don't know when, 2014, 15, to go from cash to accrual. And now we're going to go back to cash basis. And that's recommended by the state auditor too, is it not?
Yeah, it's a cash basis for reporting and audit purposes. You still can maintain your books on an accrual basis, but for purposes of reporting and auditing, it'll be done on a cash basis. So for things that are necessary to track, like assets and other things, those will be separate ledgers that will be appended to the reports. So you don't lose the benefit of the other. You just simplify your process and your reporting requirements by doing it this way. And it's the same way the city's reporting as well. So it's not unusual for small organizations to be on a cash basis. And it was a recommendation of the state auditor as well. So we should have that next month. I'm probably going to be, I probably will want to have a couple of special meetings next month just to focus on the financials. We currently have the audit underway. We're submitting what they're in the process of right now is what they call their scanning period. So they're requesting volumes of documents that Becky and Carolyn are struggling to create and present. And from the scanning, then they determine to what level of degree the scope of the audit will be. And they'll be presenting that to us next month. And so the audit, while it's underway, is, a lot of the deep dive hasn't been, is being looked at in this scanning to determine to what extent how much does the audit need to cover. And then from that, they're going to create a work plan that they're going to present to the board to show exactly, this is what we need to do to get to all the answers that we need to get to.
And David, this is the 18-19 audit, correct?
Yes, but they're actually going, they're looking as a part of the accountability, they're looking at all of it. They're not just, then they will focus on just 18-19 for the financial audit, but the accountability audit is going to expand to current time.
Right.
So they're going to look at the whole thing.
And they're doing some deep dive in some areas as well, I think. Even going,
yes, they are.
Went back.
Yep.
And we asked them to do that also.
Yeah. So one of the things that we're working on now, Becky is working on, if you recall, Becky Wagner was brought in as she is a independent CPA on a contract basis to assist us with closing out 19, but also, catching up on 20. And that is underway. It's just, we're not complete yet. We still have more work to do to get that before you. So I'm shooting for that for December. And then we're also going to have to develop some kind of a budget strategy to go forward into next year for adoption next month. So I'm hoping to get some items closed out this year so we could put together that plan as to how we go forward. We're probably going to be looking at a skeleton crew and minimal services until July 1. And so it's also one of where we're going to need to find those funds that I mentioned in terms of to get us to bridge to July 1. Otherwise, by year end, we're just not going to have cash to maintain the operational expenses going forward. So we're putting together that plan, and that's why I say December will be a critical month for us and for the board to meet, to talk about some of these critical issues. And like I say, we're working very hard to put together all of this for you. I hope to have something after the Thanksgiving holiday, so we can set up a meeting, get all of that together and present to you.
David, this is Cindy. If we have a major maintenance issue on the campus, what are we doing? What can we do? You know, something's going to go wrong here in the next 7 months. And
Yeah, it's like I say, that most of the buildings, you know, we're winterizing. If they're not essential to be open, we're not opening them. We're just keeping minimal heat and electricity into them. You know, we're using a lot of paper clips, Band-Aids, and
okay.
to kind of keep things together best they can. I mean, the crew is incredible. I mean, they do an amazing job, you know, and working on things and fixing things. They're very dedicated.
Yeah.
I just admire, you know, that dedication and work ethic that they bring to the job. So,
Good.
like I say, some of the bigger major items, we may have to reach out for help from the state, I suppose, for emergency repair, particularly if they're going to impact operations.
Right.
And so
Okay.
the 2 officer row buildings are now, you know, under remodeling. They're offline. The water sewer project will probably start up here soon. So those all the officer row building after the first of the year will be offline and winterized.
Thank you.
As far as current income, you know, there are bookings that are coming in, but they're not enough income to carry the operating costs at this point in time. So by going out and trying to find other funds, the $200,000 is going to be a big, generous help, but we're going to need more if we're going to make it to July 1st. And like I say, I'll have a plan for you next month.
And David, again, to emphasize our business on the books that I received this on November 3rd was 64,000 in November, 46,000 in December. And that's less than half per month than what we need to operate at a minimal level. 9,000 in January, 6,800 in February, and 38,000 in March. And I know those numbers fluctuate day by day, but I think we need to understand, the board needs to understand the cash influx and cash outflow situation. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Other questions for David on the finances? Okay. Maker Square loan.
So of the many balls I'm juggling, the one I'm trying to juggle the most is addressing the financial needs to close out, you know, Maker Square. The good news is, and we'll report on that later in terms of where we're at on the project, is positive. But I was able to ask Kitsap Bank if it would be possible. They mentioned this before, and I didn't quite understand what they were saying, but under the COVID rules, they're allowed to defer loan requirements up to I believe it's a 3-year, no longer than 3 years. So the question that I posed was, could we defer the payment on the line of credit that comes due in December for a period of time? And the answer to that was yes, that they would be willing to work with us on that. So with that in place, we were looking originally at a $2 million loan requirement to pay the line of credit, but also to restore a grant for the project that didn't come through. So since we now have the loan deferred, then that brings our net requirement down to $900,000, $400,000 for the money that was diverted and $500,000 for the lost grant. So what we can do now is actually look at anywhere between $500,000 to $900,000, depending upon the final numbers that are coming in on Maker Square. There's one other grant that was a Building for Arts grant that wasn't drawn completely. There's still $121,000 left in that grant. I have the two grants. There's $66,000 that I'm submitting request for a draw on that closes that one out. And then there's a $543,000 grant that I signed the contract for yesterday and sent in. And now we can draw on that grant that will pay back the foundation loan, as well as also fund an additional $214,000 towards the project. There's also funds due from APTZ that we need to put in place. And so I'm looking at trying to get all of those reconciled so that we can figure out the best strategy for the loan. I did make an amended request to the city to see if they would support that. I've got to follow up with them on that. One of the structures that I think that we could look at would be a guarantee through a line of credit access. If that could be done, then that would actually doesn't impact your debt limit unless you actually draw against it. So I think in terms of, there is a way we could do that. I've also been looking at other private sources that might be willing to fund a loan, short-term loan, to help us close the gap so that we can get the project closed. But I don't really, other than just revised numbers, I don't have anything else to report on the loan at this point.
We have an action though, the $350,000 loan from the foundation. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, we were working against a time schedule in terms of needing a contract payment that was critical, particularly for payment to the subs. In working with the contractor, we worked out a payment schedule, and so what we were essentially, because of the delay in getting the grant from the state, the $543,000 one, I worked with the foundation to do a short-term note so that we could make the contractor payment, and then I could get reimbursed from the grant, the $543,000 grant. And so I got that approved by the state, and then we went to the foundation and set up the loan. And so the problem is I didn't have time to call a board meeting to get that ratified, that action ratified. So that's what we have on the agenda today.
Okay. Questions for David on the loan and the motion that we need to approve?
This is Herb, and as president of the foundation, I participated in the initial decision to authorize this loan. The foundation has received a $350,000 short-term loan from a private individual, which in turn the foundation has loaned on a short-term basis pending receipt of the $500 and whatever $1,000 grant to the PDA so that construction of Maker Square could proceed uninterrupted. That's the background. David, you might explain how the $350,000 loan and the $214,000 loan fit together into this pending grant financing.
Yeah, when we did the loan for $350,000, the payment we made was $329,000, so we're holding the $21,000 back, and then so what we would draw from the grant is $329,000, and then combine that with the 21 that we retained to pay back the 350. That would leave a net of 214 in the grant. And so I approached Kitsap Bank about doing a grant anticipation note so that we could go ahead and make the payment, because grant requires is a reimbursement grant. So we have to pay out the 214,000 to get the 214 from the grant. Well, we won't have that readily available. So what I need to do is borrow that on a short-term note through the bank, and then I can pay the contractor the 214 and then request for reimbursement from the grant to pay off the 214 debt at the bank. So it's kind of a bouncing ball, but it works. I mean, it's called what they call a grant anticipation note. But we had to take the measure. I had to take emergency measures with the loan with the foundation because of the fear that the contractor was going to have to shut down the project at a critical point, and we needed to do everything we could to avoid that. So.
David, this is Jane. So you made an amended request to the city to kind of stand by us with that 900,000, correct? And you haven't heard a thing from them?
They've acknowledged it. There's a lot of discussion that we have to have. We haven't had it yet. I'm planning to talk to them right after the holidays. I'm exploring an option that might work for us, but I'm told from David Beckman that we might that number might come down. So we're trying to reconcile all the accounts now to see what the actual dollar amount will be, so I can keep it to bare minimum at this point.
So the 900 might come down, David?
Possibly.
Okay.
You mean after the Thanksgiving holiday, not Christmas?
Yeah, no, Thanksgiving, yeah. Because you'll hear that the project is progressing. So
it would be really good to hear from you.
I mean, there's some good news.
This is Herb. In the interest of full transparency and disclosure, the PDA will pay the Fort Worden Foundation, in addition to repaying the $350,000 in principal, 4% interest for the relatively short period, a few weeks, we believe, that this loan is outstanding. And the Fort Worden Foundation, in turn, will pay the private lender 4% interest. So it'll be net neutral. It's basically a pass-through, but I felt the interest should be disclosed.
Thanks for doing that, Herb. So that whole discussion covers agenda items 12 and 13, so let's start with 12. Any further questions on agenda item number 12? The $350,000 loan with the 4% interest. If there aren't any, can I have a motion to approve the action?
So moved.
Second. It's been moved by Todd, seconded by Cindy. Any further questions? All in favor of approving the action, say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. And then we have the grant anticipation note for $214K that David has talked about. Any further questions for David on that note? David, I guess.
Just to clarify that the 214 is contained within the grant that we've been awarded. Anticipate that I'll have all the paperwork completed next week to submit for reimbursement. It'll be very short term. I didn't mention also there's another $66,000 available in another grant that I just submitted for yesterday.
David, what do you think is the timeline for getting that 214 from the state? once you submit? Is there a couple-
If the paperwork is pretty complex, but I think we have it all together next week. Probably because we don't have a direct deposit account with the state, it'll actually come by check, so probably in 2 weeks. They've been very supportive in terms of our situation and offered to expedite things for us, so it's very good. So,
Other questions for David? Without any, can I have a motion to approve resolution 20-20?
So moved.
So moved.
Okay, can I convince you to second that, Herb?
Yes, you may. I second.
Thanks. Moved by Terry, seconded by Herb. Any further questions or comments, discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Resolution 2020 carries. We're on to the operations update. Aislinn, welcome.
Hi. All right. So I have a few things to update you guys on. And first of all, though, I do want to say I wanted to just thank David Timmons for that presentation. When I first saw it last week, it helped me feel like so much more hopeful. And I told all of my staff, like, you guys have to watch the board meeting. I mean, I tell them that usually anyways, but I was like, watch, it's gonna, like, we're going towards something. So I, again, just thank you. It means a lot. So operations is now, it includes, so when we first started this reopening, I took over the guest services and housekeeping piece, which is managed by Mel, who's incredible. And then we rolled in the maintenance and facilities department managed by Jess, also one of the most dedicated employees we have here. And then just in the last month, we've now also rolled in food and beverage, which for right now is just Reveille is the only outlet that's open, but it does include a lot of future planning for next year. So Alex is the front of house on Reveille, Mario back of house. They're amazing. Alex has this great crop of regulars and it's good. IT run by Daniel, he keeps the whole campus going. And then sales, which is now being headed up by Natalie for this period. And so I just, wanted to make sure we were all clear on what's all in this department right now, since that's changed a few times since we came back here. So Reveille, we're still going. The new restrictions just took us back to go only where we were before. We had just sort of expanded into doing some seating. And so it wasn't a huge adjustment to do that. And that's been going just fine. We're kind of trucking along there. In the packet, there was the email from Natalie about the front desk move. So we're back in the Commons. One change since that was that we're going to be moving check-in up to 3 p.m. And again, we're doing fully contactless check-out now, and that's been going well. I did want to let you guys know sort of the overall security picture of what happens. Like Cindy had that great question, like, what if something breaks? And so for what we do have the expertise on staff to fix, which is a lot of the smaller things, we have people. And so Jess is the number one on the on-call phone. And so when something happens after hours, that goes to him and he's able to manage. And then during the day, we also have people on shift all the time. So there's never a time that we don't have someone available to respond to an important call or a guest need. We have 2 of our staff members live on site and they act as our overnight security. That's Ray and Susan, who have also been around for a long time and are very committed to the fort. And so they're either sharing the duties and both here, or if one of them has to be gone, they coordinate it. So there's always somebody here. And some of the changes that are just kind of going on with Parks. Parks is closing earlier now because day use closes at dusk technically. So we are doing the half gate at night at 6:30. We go ahead and take care of that after Parks has done their sort of final drive through to clear out who's here. And then it's our security after that piece who also goes through, checks, you know, the buildings and just kind of make sure there's nothing happening. Okay, so Todd reviewed some of the upcoming numbers, and I do, you know, I think David did a good job of laying out the challenges with getting the months closed. So when I say like, well, and I'm going to talk more about what's coming up in the future, but when I say like, these are the revenue numbers, it's what's coming directly out of Maestro, which is our property management system, which is very robust, much more so than our previous one. But it does mean that it hasn't been double checked. And so if there was a cancellation that someone did a chargeback on instead, that might not necessarily be reflected in some of these numbers. So that's just why I wanted to put that caveat on them, but they're close. So for October, we ended at about 95,000 in leisure revenue, and but that was against a budget of 144. So we're definitely, you know, we have not been hitting what was in that initial reopening budget. For August hit, you know, August came really close. September was tracking over, and then because of the smoke, we ended up closing under it, but still not too bad, but definitely a steep drop off in October. Right now for November, we're looking at about 60K for the whole month. And that includes 23 houses are occupied this weekend. Like just this weekend, I think is something like 20K. So, and we did have some cancellations with the new restrictions, but we also picked up some houses. So the net is maybe like a loss of 3. So, and then December is also tracking right now, right about 60K. So, but that's against a budget of 84. So it closes the gap more. December is doing like better than it was previously, but it's not hitting those reopening budget numbers. We are going to be doing a bit of more of a push on trying to fill some more of those December dates. The end of the month finishes really strong. There's still strong Christmas and New Year's bookings. So that's the basics, but I'm happy to answer any questions if people want to know kind of what's going on or.
Thank you for those revenue numbers.
Yeah.
I think we've all been wondering how things are
Right.
looking, especially with the changing COVID situation again. Questions for Aislinn? Okay, thank you.
Just
And
a,
please thank your team.
just a congratulations to Aislinn on your new member of the Habitat Board. So congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, I think you all know housing is really important to me, and I'm honored to be part of the Habitat Board now.
Great. And again, please thank your team from us.
I will. Yeah, they're the best of the best. I can't overstate how incredible they are. So.
Yeah, I wanted to give a shout out to Aislinn too, personally, because she has stepped in and taken on a lot of responsibility. And we owe a big debt to her in regards to hanging in there as we consolidated down. She stepped up without even blinking an eye. And I really admire it. I admire that effort. So we're in good hands in that. And, you know, with combining that with her team, I mean, then we're in great hands. So,
yeah.
Good.
Okay.
Thanks, Aislinn. Item 15, the KPTZ lease update. Both KPTZ and the PDA are really looking forward to getting this closed. Right now, we're waiting to hear back from our historic tax credit attorneys in Washington, D.C. As I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, you saw the economic terms of the lease last month. Dave Robison walked through a high-level term sheet. What we need that now to be converted to is a lease document that will enable us to execute the historic tax credit transaction. And that's something that our DC attorneys need to weigh in on. So both the PDA and KPTZ are really waiting with bated breath for this at this point. As you can imagine, year end is a very busy time for historic tax credit attorneys. We're not only the only organization in the queue, but John Watts is in regular communication with both our HTC council in DC and KPTZ to keep them abreast of status.
I could give you a brief update. I talked with Eric Wishnoff, the Washington attorney. We have everything in place that he needs to begin implementation.
Good.
What we're working now on is getting confirmation from the investor. And once we have that, then we can begin the process to close. One of the things I can offer too is a lot of people got confused, and I have to admit, even I was. The December deadline, or the December 31st deadline for it, is for the credits to be eligible to be used in 2020. If it doesn't get closed by that deadline, the tax credits don't go away. What they do is they roll into the next year for 2021. What the individual can do, the investor can do, is they can still, if they pay their 2020 taxes, they can still amend their return and then apply the credits that they earned in 2021 to their 2020 taxes. So in effect, you know, we're good to go. We just need now to get and the trigger is that the property is put in use for its intended purpose. So when you hear about the C of O, that's the gold standard to show that the property can be put in use for its intended purpose. But a temporary certificate of occupancy will still make us eligible. But so the tax credits now are, I have a phone call scheduled this afternoon with the investor. If they give us a green light, we're going to begin the process to go to closing on the tax credits for both the KPTZ as well as makers.
Great. Any questions on the HTCs or the KPTZ lease update? Okay. Next item we have is the David Timmons employment agreement. Let me hit some of the high points, and
I'm going to recuse from this. I'll be back.
Okay. Let me hit some of the high points on this. The agreement with David runs through June 30th, 2021. Because of the number of issues, as you have heard David talk about today, he's going from half-time to full-time to be able to execute this. But Todd and I and David will meet on a quarterly basis. The first target is mid-January to really take a look at that and see and ensure that David needs to continue to work on a full-time basis. So what we basically did was take his existing rate and just double it because it's going from 20 to 40 hours a week. And we'll keep the board on a monthly basis abreast of, on a quarterly basis abreast of those dialogues that we have with David around his scope of the work he has on his plate over the next quarter. We did add a benefit allowance, you will note. And I think besides that, it's pretty straightforward. Those were the high points. Any questions on the contract? Without any, can I have a motion to approve and execute the employment contract with David?
So moved.
Okay, Cindy moves. Leela, can I sell you to it on a second?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. And Guy, I saw your lips moving, but you were muted. So Any further questions or discussion? All in favor of approving the employment agreement, say aye.
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 Opposed? The employment contract is approved. Todd, do you want to talk about the board appointment update, item 17?
Very briefly, yes. If you recall, the nominating committee met and interviewed candidates for the board on October 15th. Those committee members included the mayor, Jane Kilburn, PDA board secretary, Dave Robeson, David Timmons, both of whom had emergencies come up and could not attend that meeting. Steve Reed from the Fort Ward Advisory Committee, he's a chair, and Heron Scott, who's the executive director of the PT School of Woodworking. We met, interviewed the candidates, had robust discussions, and unanimously decided to forward to the city council reappointments of Jane Kilburn, Leila Hilton, and Guy Heckscher. Again, recognizing needing continuity of leadership, the expertise that they brought to this board. And the city council, the mayor has since then decided to continue their current terms and not to reappoint to new terms at this point in time. So the three of them will continue with a continuation of current terms. I think the mayor really feels it's because things are in flux right now that she really felt that it was more prudent not to add new people to the board, whether they're current or new board members. So that's where we stand right now, and we will need to talk with the mayor about what she anticipates for the future.
And she's holding off on the city and the partner.
That's correct. Thank you.
Yeah, and that's disappointing. I'm just looking forward to their participation, but
Yeah.
I know that in time we'll get there.
Yeah, and Heron was selected by the committee again to be the partner representative as an ex officio member of our board, and the mayor was going to serve as an ex officio member from the city. And I really appreciate the fact that she nominated herself, because that's one more time commitment on a very, very busy public official right now. So, I would like to encourage Heron to informally participate with us. I think there's no reason why we couldn't have him. He doesn't have to be officially appointed, and it'd be nice to have that voice as we move through these difficult times.
Great. Thanks, Todd.
This is Herb. I have a question. I just want to be clear on what the city council has actually done. They basically have extended Guy, Jane, and Leila as directors of the PDA on a month-to-month basis. Is that correct?
The city council hasn't actually done anything. In my understanding, the mayor just did not take forward our recommendations at this time. And apparently our bylaws say that we can continue until we're reappointed.
So it's our governing documents that allow the three members to continue until something else happens.
That's correct. And she and the city manager, John Morrow, did confer with city attorney on this matter and made that determination that the terms could be continued.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. And then our last formal agenda item, executive committee meeting status. David, do you want to take this one?
Here. One of the things that I talked to the chairs about that I'd like to do is, because of all the critical nature of everything is, I think the full board should be engaged in all matters relating to the fort. I don't believe that we should be holding executive committee meetings. I think that I'd like to recommend that you suspend the executive committee indefinitely, and then that way we would bring all matters to the full board for full deliberation and discussion and disclosure. And I think it's going to be a more transparent process, particularly with the critical decisions that are coming up in the next month here. I think that that's the approach I'd like to take.
That makes a lot of sense. I agree with that.
And David, essentially the Finance and Audit Committee has really been folded into the full board. We're really using the full board as a Finance and Audit Committee, essentially. I know Jeff Jackson previously was meeting at least once a month with finance staff and doing the deep dive, but we really have used the board as a Finance and Audit Committee. I think the entire board needs to be engaged in depth with the finances of the PDA.
Yeah, I concur with both those recommendations. I mean,
Yeah,
the Finance and Audit Committee can always step up for a subset of the major tasks, but almost everything now is major. So it should just be seen as arms and legs for the full board if necessary.
I agree, David, because, you know, we don't need one more meeting, certainly, because it takes staff time to prepare for things like that too. But also to be clear, the executive committee minutes were public, so it's not like it wasn't transparent.
Oh, no, I wasn't alluding to that. I think that it was just the idea of, from the public's perspective, it's hard to track who's who, you know, and what meetings. And so.
So do we need a motion, David?
Yes, you will. Yes.
So we are we suspending both the executive committee and the Finance and Audit Committee then? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
Okay.
I think the work would be done by the full board, unless you want to assign specifically
Projects to one of the committees?
Yeah.
Okay. So can I have a motion to suspend the Finance and Audit Committee and the Executive Committee meeting, and maybe we can revisit this in a couple of months to see whether or not we want to reinstate or continue.
I think you need to add the word temporarily.
Temporarily, okay.
I'll prove it. I mean, I'll make the motion with that amendment.
Okay, thank you, Terry. A second?
Second.
Guy seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, the motion carries. Well, thank you. We got through a lot of business in and I feel like it was an expedited fashion. We'd like to open the floor for public comment. Joan, can you facilitate that?
Norm, I think just briefly can I ask David Beckman to give a quick update on Makers?
Oh, sure.
I forgot to bring that in, so.
Okay, great. David?
And David, you may need to unmute.
Yeah, he's muted. Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. So real quickly before we jump into Makers Square, just a quick update on the Washington State Parks projects. David previously mentioned that building 4 and 5 are underway, and you will soon be seeing a white ghost envelope come up around them when we get these calm days like we have today. But that work is proceeding. They've started taking out windows and replacing them with plywood infill there so they can continue with siding removal. And excuse my dog from barking within this. We also have on December 8th, we have a pre-bid walkthrough for the sewer and water project. which then will begin January 4th, right after the New Year's holiday there. And we'll keep you posted on award of that contract. And then in terms of Maker Square, we've been extremely busy keeping track of what's going on here. Clark has updated their construction schedule for us on a weekly basis. And if you all would like, I'd be glad to send that out to you. I send it to Guy and David so they can see what's going on a weekly basis here. I did have meetings with both the fire marshal and their representative from Safe Build, who will be acting as the building official / signing off on our certificate of occupancy here for Maker Square. Both meetings went extremely well. The fire marshal, the only thing that came up from him was related to once we get occupancy, that then Maker Square, all of the surrounding pathways then really do become fire access lanes. So all of the typical parking that goes along within there will not be allowed within that zone. And I've sent out a memo to all of our partners relating to that. The building official, we had a very good conversation related to what was required for each individual building for occupancy. And our current scope of work is very close to achieving that. We do have to add some landings at the bottom of stairs and ramps and connecting pathways to the existing saved pathways or paved pathways, excuse me here. And that will be a change to the contract. And right now with the patchwork and the new ramping and new gravel infill that we have to do around there to level things out, that will be a change of somewhere between $25,000 to $30,000 in the contract amount. And I'm working with Clark Construction right now on an update to our change log so we can see where we stand overall in terms of the project's budget as we move forward here. The schedule updates that I've talked about still show us completing work, getting the certificate of occupancy right around December 15th here. And just because we achieve certificate of occupancy around December 15th, that doesn't mean that Clark is going away. They will be on site for at least another 30 days after that date, completing punch lists, doing final building commissioning, and other miscellaneous things that will pop up as we move through to total occupancy of the space itself. And KPTZ's space is still following that same schedule there too. KPTZ has a few other things that they are working on to finalize how they totally occupy the building and send a signal from Fort Worden, working with the various public entities there for their antenna. But all of that is moving forward as well within this. We don't see any roadblocks to getting us to the occupancy at this point. We do have our final elevator or our pseudo final elevator inspection scheduled for December 8th. And then we'll be waiting for the state L&I building inspector to come out to finalize that elevator. And that's the one piece that has the potential to lag because we're just at the whim of L&I's schedule for that. But we're hopeful that it will achieve final inspections in that same time frame for us here. Any questions related to Maker Square?
No, it's great to hear that we have a final date.
Yeah.
Very hopeful news. Thank you, David.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and as I mentioned earlier about the financing, we're pulling that all together. So we'll probably have some discussion on that next month. But also we've got the green light now on the historic tax credits, so we can, if the investor gives us, the go, then that's coming together.
When can we do a walkthrough?
You can do a walkthrough anytime you want, Jane.
I'll just walk up
I'm more than glad to. Well, you still have to check in at Clark's office because we do still have COVID testing going on. I'd be glad to meet anybody that wants to come whenever they want to go through the site. So just let me know.
I'm due for another one now too. So Jane, maybe you and I can mask up and walk together.
Perfect.
I'd like to join
That'd be great.
Me too.
Yeah.
Maybe we could find 2 or 3 times that, that David, maybe if you send 2 or 3 times that you would recommend, we can send it out to the board and have people sign up. So you only have to do it, a small handful of times.
Sure. I mean, would you guys like to do it next week after the Thanksgiving holiday here, or after that?
It'd be fine with me, but we should make sure that it's just a small group at a time.
Right.
Actually, it would have been a good walk after all that turkey, but
I know. The other thing I want to acknowledge, Guy has dusted off his slide rule and his spreadsheets, and he's been doing a bunch of work with David Beckman again. So now he just has to drive up from Gig Harbor and get stuck at the bridge and turn around. But again, we really appreciate all the work that Guy does. So thank you.
Just briefly on glamping, because I know that has been an issue, our plan now is to try to use the facilities crew to erect the tents. It's going to take a little bit of time to get them all up. There's 15 of them. Some of them are already up, so it's just probably going to be one a week, so that we can at least get as much secured as possible up there while we renegotiate the loan to finish out everything. And also, that's something else Guy has been offering to help on and been very helpful in pulling together an estimated budget. We'll need to submit all of that to the bank as we go forward on that front. So,
Guy, a question about, David and Guy, a question about winterizing those tents. Could you use a donated, those small oil circulating heaters? Would those work for any of those tents?
They said they should be minimal heat in each one, and so we're going to have to look at how to do that. Because there will be condensation and moisture, so some type of heating is recommended. So we're going to have to look at that as we go through it.
Todd, I would recommend, while the radiant heaters are a good source of heat, that we need something to circulate air a little bit rather than just trying to contain it there so we don't get condensation.
Gotcha.
The scheduled Duraflame electric heater is a good thing because it does have a fan on it. But again, that's a dollar value for those types of things. So if we can find some other radiant exhaust heat or something with air movement, it would be good.
Okay. Thanks, Dave.
Great.
Yeah, but I just wanted to emphasize, we are aware of the situation up there. And also, one of the things that was one of the employees was when they get a camper is going to move up there, be on site, that provide better security too. So.
Right.
I should have a budget for completion to you early next week, David.
Thanks, Guy. Okay, without any further questions, let's go ahead and take public comment. Joan?
Once again, last call for today's meeting. If anyone's interested in making a statement, please select your raise hand icon next to your name in the participants panel. And if you're with us by phone, just press *9 and I will be able to see you either way. And each person is allowed 3 minutes for their comments if we have anybody who would like to comment. Not seeing anyone yet. We'll take another second here. Do some mindful breathing while we wait. Yeah, I don't think so. I think that wraps that up.
Okay. With that said, we're at closure here. Thank you to the board. I know there's a lot going on. I know it'll take more of our time in the short term, and but the commitment is really appreciated. I wish everyone, the board and staff and everyone on the call, our partners and community members, happy Thanksgiving. And keep track of the public notices. As David said, we'll probably have at least one special meeting in December. And then our regularly scheduled meeting is Wednesday, the 16th. It's a week early in December because of the Christmas holiday. So have a great Thanksgiving, everyone.
You too, Norm.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks,
care.
everyone.
Be safe.
Thank you.